Hey all you cats and kittens and all you non-binary fittens, it's your boy DBiddles. Welcome to Chatbots. Hopefully you're all clued in as to that voodoo that I do, but if not, here's the long and the short of it. I collect plastic robot toys, the bots get built, all the while DBiddles talks too much about whatever's on his laughably small mind, and sometimes he even says something vaguely resembling smart. Though most of the time it's just him talking about cartoons and comics and movies and such while making lists that are way longer than they need to be to illustrate his points. Today we have the Hy-Gogg, one of my favorite Xeon mobile suits from Mobile Suit Gundam 0080, War in the Pocket, which is a 6-episode OVA series that takes place concurrently as the original Mobile Suit Gundam, and is widely considered one of the best pieces of Gundam media out there. This is a pretty good place to dip your toe into the Universal Century timeline of Gundam, or Gundam in general, if you're interested. The lore is pretty light, and the entire story beyond the setting is completely self-contained. It's the future, humanity has colonized space, a war with mobile suits is happening, and the two sides are the Earth Federation and the Principality of Xeon. Got all that? Cool, you now know everything you need to know to watch this series. See, this Gundam stuff's not so scary. And, at a breezy 6 episodes, it's not much of a time sink. Set during the original series' one-year war, the story follows 3 main characters. There's Alfred Izuruha, a young schoolboy who lives on the neutral civilian space colony Side 6, who thinks that war is very cool, what with all the rad military vehicles and weapons and the fighting. He plays war with his buddies, has lots of toys that resemble weapons, plays war-themed video games, and he just thinks it's all so cool that he sneaks onto the local Earth Federation base on a dare in order to snap a picture of their secret prototype mobile suit, one of the series' titular Gundams. There he meets our second main character, Bernard Wiseman, a rookie pilot for the Principality of Xeon who is on a secret mission to infiltrate Site 6 and capture or destroy the prototype. Failure in this mission will result in his commanding officers just destroying all of Side 6 entirely, so Bernie can't afford to mess this up. Bernie's status as a rookie means he's the butt of all his comrades' orders and abuse, so when Al openly admires him for being a soldier and wants to help him complete his mission, he can't help but take a shine to this surrogate little brother figure. Unfortunately for both of them, our third main character, Christina Mackenzie, Al's next-door neighbor who takes a burgeoning romantic shine to Bernie, is secretly the pilot for the prototype Gundam, and she's not going to simply let some Xeon spies just casually destroy the Federation's best chance at getting the upper hand in this war. Dramatic irony and tragedy ensue as the 3 unwittingly draw closer and closer to their fated conflict, and not to spoil, but let's just say that by the end, young Alfred realizes all his interest in war as a fun game has left him blind to the harsh realities of what war actually entails, and it's not such a fun game anymore. And let's just pause for a brief moment to consider how Gundam, and many of its real robot contemporaries, were stories that meditate heavily on the senseless brutality of war, that chastise warmongering sentiments, that ponder how war seems to benefit the powerful, that explores how the sale of arms not only enables more violent war, but creates incentive on the parts of the arms dealers to further exacerbate war. And in the particular case of War in the Pocket, it makes the point of identifying how war is often portrayed as a fun game that kids can enjoy. And then, let's reconcile that with how this series continues to this day based on the extreme profitability for real-world companies which are making money selling plastic facsimiles of these fictional war machines to their audience whom they just got done lecturing on the grisly cost of war. Funny how even things that criticize the system can be co-opted by the same system for profit, and given enough time, the themes and morals kind of fade into the background and the audience comes to only appreciate the spectacle and not the substance. And wow, that's about the quickest and most succinct I'll ever get in talking about the bot that I'm building while seeding themes and ideas for the main section. So let's just hurry on to our main topic while you make a mental note to check out Gundam War in the Pocket, which is probably on Crunchyroll or something, or readily available for purchase from Right Stuf and Amazon. So hey, we took my kid to see their first ever in-theaters movie in early April. We chose the Super Mario Bros. Movie, naturally, as an ideal first theater-going experience. Had a real good time eating popcorn and candy, watching Mario with an excited 5-year-old. You know how it goes. It's a cute little movie. You know, if you aren't expecting much in terms of compelling plot or character arcs. It's kinda shoddily put together narrative-wise, but as a kids movie, it does what it needs to, setting up a bunch of well-animated, big, crowd-pleasing, colorful action set pieces. And frankly, it does just about everything you would hope for from a movie about the world's most famous video game series. But that didn't stop a few people from taking offense. Of course, you had the film critics talking about how it's a movie that'll be a gas for kids, but their parents will be lukewarm on it, which, yeah, fair, I guess. I kind of went in expecting just the bare minimum of Mario and friends, and I didn't leave disappointed. Keegan-Michael Key as Toad was way more fun than I expected. Jack Black was clearly having a blast in his role as Bowser. Sadly, not enough Charlie Day as Luigi. I really like Charlie Day. And yeah, some non-stop rainbow-colored action just blasted into our retinas for about 90 minutes. That's about all I or an enthusiastic 5-year-old could really hope for. But then there were the other people who had some problems with this innocuous little piece of children's entertainment. See, one of the few changes they made to the traditional Mario lore, aside from giving all the characters actual voices instead of goofy cartoon accents, was that Luigi was the one who ended up captured by Bowser at the start of the movie, rather than Princess Peach. Bowser still wants to take over the Mushroom Kingdom, and he makes it very clear that he has a massive crush on the princess. But early on, the plumbers get separated and Luigi ends up falling into Bowser's territory, thereby motivating Mario to get involved in the conflict between Peach and Bowser. The brothers, you see, are only in the familiar video game land because they were accidentally transported from Brooklyn while trying to do some plumbing deep below the city. And Peach isn't quite the helpless damsel. Having grown up in the Mushroom Kingdom, she's grown quite proficient at using power-ups and doing all the wild platform jumping that is typical for the video games. Meanwhile, Mario, who's only just showed up, is having a pretty rough time coming to grips with all the powers and skills that the other characters like Peach and Donkey Kong are perfectly accustomed to. Now, he does get the hang of it in the end. He and Luigi end up saving the kingdom and kicking Bowser's ass. And there is a short part during the end of the second act where Peach does get captured. And prior to arriving in the Mushroom Kingdom, Mario's shown as having a knack for some bold, quick-thinking parkour that, with some time for adjustment, will serve him in his inevitable adventuring. But none of that was good enough for the naysayers, the status quo warriors, who were very upset that this new woke feminist agenda being featured in Princess Peach will be yet another contributing factor in the ultimate downfall of Western society. How it'll teach little girls to be independent and maybe then they won't want to have families or get married. And how it'll teach little boys to be emasculated and passive and therefore less capable of providing for or of getting into heteronormative relationships with women. Prior to the release of this movie, all the usual suspects of shitty, hateful pop culture critics had their panties in a bunch over a proactive princess. You ever notice how these losers are always concerned with how feminism and queerness and race mixing will be the downfall of Western society? And yet, it always seems like the problems that are actually meaningfully harming society are the same ones we've always seen. You know, greed, hatred, ignorance, intolerance, etc. I can think of a lot of ways people being hateful or greedy is actively harming society on a broad level, but I can think of very few actually credible explanations for how girls wearing pants or boys wearing makeup fit into all of that. But, whatever. But yeah, the claim is that this is some sinister politicization of children's media and an indoctrination against conventional gender roles. What's even more wild is that one of the people espousing these anti-empowered princess narratives was, themselves, a woman by the name of Anna Perez, who has some kind of segment or program as part of the news network in heavy quotation marks called Live from America TV. She argued that women feeling confident and independent will lead to them going out into the world, trying to have careers, and failing, and then somehow, no joke, she said that this will lead to these impressionable young women who are getting twisted ideas from the fun cartoon video game movie. She said that this would lead to them getting raped, which is kind of just frothingly insane to say out loud. I think I need a breakdown of the logical A to B on that one. These are the kinds of people who get paid to provide political commentary on behalf of conservatives, huh? You guys aren't sending your best. And, it also kinda seems like it doesn't even fit in with her own internal logic. Like, if that's the kind of thing you believe and live by, then why are you, a woman, telling me, a man, your opinion as a part of your career, as if I should consider it? Why aren't you barefoot and pregnant and cooking your husband dinner instead of telling whole audiences of men their business with makeup and hair on, visible to the public? And are you reading from an article or teleprompter? Harlot, strumpet, your place is not to be educated in any matters beyond the rearing of children. Next, you'll be telling me that you vote and are active in politics. That is not the intended role the Lord our God had in mind for women. Just keep quiet, make sandwiches, and hope that the only thing striking you at night is your husband's genitals instead of his fist, you back-talking cow. It's especially ironic since a lot of these dweebs, when they start whinging about wokeness, they're usually doing so while overlooking a lot of long-standing precedent for the very thing they're angry about. It's true that Princess Peach is traditionally a kidnapped victim in the Mario games and the central driving motivation for the brothers to jump on Goombas, but she also has a long history of being an equal participant, capable of her own agency and player character status. She go-karts, she golfs, she plays tennis and soccer and basketball, she participates in the ruthless Squid Game-style blood sport of Mario Party, and she's been a staple of the slightly less bloodthirsty Super Smash Bros. Fighting game since Melee, where she can throw hands against all kinds of video game powerhouses like Ganondorf, Mewtwo, Ridley, Solid Snake, Donkey Kong, and her frequent captor Bowser. She was an equal participant in adventures in the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. She and Bowser both get added to the Adventuring Party in Super Mario RPG, and she fares pretty well in the Super Mario Adventures comic series published in Nintendo Power Magazine in 1992. Still not convinced? Well, not only has she had her own solo video game from 2005, Super Princess Peach, where she is the heroine and she needs to rescue Mario and Luigi from Bowser, but she is also one of the 4 playable characters in the North American release of Super Mario Bros. 2 from 1988, and was subsequently the only playable character in a licensed 1990 spin-off watch game based on Mario 2, entitled Princess Toadstool's Castle Run. So kinda sounds like all these complaints about Mario going woke are coming from a bunch of fake gamers. I'm obviously not saying there's no precedent for Peach being a helpless damsel. The mere fact that it is the presumed default for the Super Mario franchise to so many people, casuals and fans alike, speaks to the prevailing perception of the games. Taken in aggregate, the number of times in-game where Mario rescues the princess versus the times where she is an active participant in thwarting evil does kind of illustrate it as somewhat anomalous. And it's not just Super Mario that features the damsel in distress trope, but a lot of things like Legend of Zelda, Resident Evil 4, John Carter of Mars, superhero comics, sci-fi film serials, fairy tales, slasher movies, classic black and white movies where women get tied to train tracks, to any number of stories. Why then did the Mario movie opt to make Luigi the captured plot device and Peach into a capable, competent badass? Well, I can think of a couple reasons. For one, they likely changed Princess Peach because it makes the property more marketable to little girls. Obviously, it's not weird for girls to like male characters or for boys to like female characters, but as silly as it sounds, it does make it easier for you to relate or to feel included if someone similar to you are personally represented in the stories you experience. And that ease translates to dollars for the companies that produce this stuff. It's not only more fun and more interesting to make Princess Peach a playable character in your fun go-karting video game, but if it ropes in a few more customers who otherwise might have felt alienated from your product, well, all the better. Representation, as it turns out, is not only important, but it's profitable too. If kids are kind of lukewarm on this plumber guy but think the pretty pink princess is cool, if there are kids who think the guy with the red, white, and blue shield is just alright but are pretty awestruck by the idea that a black guy can not only be a superhero but a king, if there are kids who think that the macho man tough guys are whatever but are excited by the notion that a soft boy or a girl who likes other girls or a genderqueer pink dinosaur can be cool and strong and important too, then I want to see those kids happy. And you know who else does? All the media producers and toy manufacturers who are always looking to expand their audience demographics. The whole notion of go woke, go broke is frankly a joke. But even beyond that, the helpless princess trope is just kinda tired, you know? Like, I get how it's kinda this archetypical hero's journey type story, but it's also kinda just cliche and boring, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I like a lot of stories that use that kind of plot device. But if all stories featured it, or even most of them did, it'd be pretty lame, right? Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite video games of all time, as is Super Mario World, Shadow of the Colossus, and the Legend of Zelda series. But I don't really love those games for their plots, you know? And even if I did, I'd really prefer if the damsel characters be more nuanced and active than some helpless trophy figure. Like, think about Princess Leia in Star Wars, who, yes, is a princess and needs rescuing on multiple occasions in just the original trilogy, and yet, she's beloved by fans because she's not just a pretty girl with hair buns and a metal bikini, but because she's cool. She's smart, she's sassy, she doesn't take Han Solo's shit, she's handy with a blaster, she's a military leader and a tactician and a diplomat, and a strong political leader in a rebellion against an evil authoritarian empire. Or think about Lois Lane in Superman. You know, a career woman in the 1930s and 40s would have been quite unusual, controversial even. And yet here's Lois, an investigative journalist who's not afraid to walk into the lion's mouth to get a scoop on very wealthy and corrupt individuals or power-mad villains or alien invaders, not because she knows Superman will have her back, but because she believes in the importance of the free press and an informed public. And those are just the women who are damsels in their stories. Think about all your favorite ladies in fiction who are as cool, if not cooler, than their surrounding male characters. Let's face it, as cool as Princess Leia or Lois Lane might be, they're nowhere near as cool as an Ahsoka Tano or a Wonder Woman. Some of my favorites include Bayonetta, She-Hulk, Ryoko from Tenchi Muyo, Ida the Owl Lady, Kei and Yuri from Dirty Pair, the Crystal Gems from Steven Universe, Chun-Li, etc. I don't feel emasculated by strong and smart ladies. If anything, I prefer them. And while my kid is free to like or dislike whatever they want, they're a burgeoning individual themselves after all, and I seriously hope that there's always someone present in their media who can represent those capable, competent, strong, and noble qualities who my kid can relate to and admire. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of dudes on the net, mostly incels or the people who profit off perpetuating incel culture, who say dumb shit things about how it's gay for dudes to like strong women, or how certain women who aren't conventional cookie-cutter hotties are unattractive and destructive to society. And I want you to think for a second about how insane that is. The notion that it's gay to like women if you don't like the right type of women, or that it's indicative of your own failings as a man if certain qualities of a woman turn you on. The notion that women having qualities typically associated with dudes like strength and intelligence and independence is somehow detrimental to society. That's painfully fucking stupid. Not only that, that's fucking weak. If alpha males were an actual thing, and that's a bloody great if, then you know what, that's some fucking beta brain thinking right there. If there are dudes out there who are made to feel small by smart or strong women, or who can't get with girls because girls aren't docile or submissive enough, my brother, that is a skill issue. You're just mad that other individuals, other thinking, feeling, unique people with real fucking lives, aren't set to easy mode for the sake of your social, emotional, and sexual fulfillment. You're mad at your own lack of riz or a decent personality. You're mad that your own quote-unquote low-value status as a man isn't being catered to with partners who are socially manufactured to be dependent on dudes, no matter how inept or unlikable any particular dude might be. And so you cope by going to the gym and whining on the internet that girls aren't good enough tradwife material for you, rather than own up to the fact that you're just a fucking noob when it comes to fulfilling interpersonal, intimate relationships. That too is some fake gamer shit. Get good, scrubs, you can't beat Ninja Gaiden with that kind of mentality. In fact, that whole toxic masculinity mindset is represented in the film in the form of Bowser, who is played by the undeniable standout performance of the movie and one of my favorite Hollywood personalities, Jack Black. Bowser's goal is nominally to rule all of Super Mario World, yes, but his primary goal, as stated throughout, is to impress and marry the princess. He starts the movie by finding and stealing the superstar as his ultimate tool for conquest. In his big villain speech to his minions, he gets them all fired up with grandstanding about power and domination, and at the end, he ends it with, "And then Princess Peach will totally love me." Which, of course, kind of bewilders all his troops. His whole show of brute masculine force is to impress Peach, or to ultimately take her regardless of her will, if/when she rejects his advances. And that's exactly what happens. He rolls up at her door, showing his awesome military supremacy and his acquisition of the superstar as a flex, promises her that they can rule together, and then when she refuses, he just says, "Too bad, we're getting married anyways." Further, Bowser is shown to be very self-conscious. He practices pickup lines in the mirror, he's trying to take flirting advice from Kamek, he's very nervous about their actual first meeting with Peach. It'd be really adorable if you didn't know going in that it's going to fail and he's going to resort to forced marriage before the third act starts. He's probably reasonably concerned with his appearance, unsure if a big, spiky reptile such as himself will be attractive to a dainty human. But if the internet has taught me anything, he'd probably be okay, as anyone and anything can make someone out there horny, especially if all the fan art leading up to this movie and from the past 40 years is anything to go by. Not to mention the frequent jokes about Peach getting constantly kidnapped as an excuse to cuckold Mario. And also, I know from personal experience that if you like another person as a person and not just because they're sexy, regardless of personal taste or appearance, well, let's just say that your interests have a way of expanding to accommodate whoever you like the most. And Bowser could be an attractive individual. Being voiced by Jack Black, he actually has a solo musical number in his room, with a little piano-accompanied serenade that he writes for Peach, that has since gone mega viral on social media for its catchiness. If he dropped the world domination thing and maybe just tried to make friends with Peach as a fellow head of state, and then maybe tried to shoot his shot after they'd developed a better relationship, maybe he'd have better results. Maybe opening up trade routes that could benefit both nations, brokering trade deals with Donkey Kong Country and the Penguin peoples, could improve the livelihoods of all their citizenry, and could demonstrate what a thoughtful, pragmatic, and giving individual he could be. And even if she still didn't want to marry him, he'd still have benefited from his diplomacy, gaining access to resources for his nation and the allyship of another sovereign nation just in case they get invaded by, like, I don't know, Wartrick, Tatanga, or King Boo in the next movie. He clearly thinks being a power-mad despot is both no big deal and would actually be doing Peach a favor. Because he obviously wants to rule all the various lands of Super Mario World, the ethics of harming and enslaving sovereign nations not having occurred to him, surely Peach is out to do the same, perhaps only hindered by the limitations of her puny mushroom subjects. He just assumes that she would want the same thing he wants, that everybody does, that everybody craves dominance and power, or to be a trad wife for the dude who has dominance and power. When his nice guy gesture fails, there's a brief moment where he's very plainly wounded, unable to comprehend why she is being mean to him after he's brought her a gift, the opportunity to rule the whole world. With news of a human-like Mario showing up in the Mushroom Kingdom, Bowser instantly becomes jealous of Mario, despite having very little actual knowledge of Peach and Mario's relationship, because he just assumes that another human will be surface-level attractive enough to completely obliterate his chances with her. And he really needn't have worried. I don't know if this is just a failing of the script or a deliberate feature, but the expected canon coupling of Mario and Peach never manifests. There's a brief moment where DK accuses Mario of trying to clumsily flirt with Peach, which Mario denies, and then Toad gets involved saying that Mario is actually being super smooth, and that Peach is totally into him, before it all gets interrupted with another action scene, which kinda sums up the whole movie, character moments getting interrupted by or glossed over in favor of action scenes. But outside of that, and I think maybe a job well done peck on the cheek to both brothers at the end of the film, Mario and Peach seem pretty platonic throughout. Anyways, this movie is obviously a big hit for kids and adults alike because it's a major motion picture about a long-time hit video game that has all ages appeal, and it's really fun, so it's just making buckets and buckets of money. You know, there's probably going to be several sequels now and spin-off Donkey Kong movies and probably a lot of other video game movie adaptations now muscling in on the scene that superheroes have been dominating for over a decade and a half now. And since it's making lots of money, a lot of the status quo warriors have been coping by saying, haha, it's actually anti-woke and that's why it's making $1 billion. We win again. Which doesn't make any sense for a number of reasons. One, the whole go woke, go broke thing has never been true. Two, we don't even really have a firm grasp of what woke means, let alone anti-woke. Three, you're just covering your asses because you were wrong, etc. But I'd also like to point out that the whole thing about Bowser kinda spits in the face of that whole anti-woke thing, too. Like, making your villain emblematic of toxically masculine traits and then having him get his ass kicked for it by the princess's platonic buddies, I don't know, isn't that kind of woke messaging? I guess Anna Perez was partially right. It does kind of question those traditional gender roles a little if we assume being an asshole is a traditionally masculine trait. Which it sure seems like it is often the case with the conservative crowds who are the ones responsible for propping up that Andrew Tate guy. Maybe the damsel in distress trope still has legs as a means of explaining to dudes why you shouldn't be a dipshit. DBiddles, are you really going to spend your entire video talking about some dipshit comments that no one who you would ever respect would ever listen to about some movie that you yourself were only moderately enthusiastic about? Are you really spending this much time contemplating the pathos and gender politics of a children's video game movie about the guy in the red cap who jumps on turtles? No, you're right, viewer. Obviously that's not the main topic of this video. Making fun of grifter content creators and the absolute smooth-brained losers who think they're smart is just fun. This is just kind of my overly long introduction to my main thesis. I'm making up for only needing 2 paragraphs to talk about today's bot. With the further mainstreaming of and catering to nerd hobbies lately, there's been a greater emphasis on discussing them and the thoughts and ideas presented by them. And obviously for me, a dude who thinks and talks too much about these hyperfixations, that's perfect. I love learning and sharing deeper understanding and analysis of all my favorite stuff. The whole reason I still cling to all my favorite things, despite being technically an adult for over a decade and a half now, is because I too still see value in this stuff, not just as escapism, but as relevant parables about life, the universe, and everything. And as you grow, hopefully too will your capacity to understand these things. Because the people who create this stuff aren't just slapping their action figures together for the amusement of paying audiences, they usually have a point to the stories. Obviously, the action figures are what get you in the door as a kid, but the older you get, the more you're supposed to appreciate why the action figures are banging up against each other, and what you can take from it and apply to your actual life where the car chases and sword fights and magic missiles aren't really a prominent feature. And for a lot of media, particularly the media that gets marketed to older audiences, this is easy. Earlier drafts of this script featured digressions about Star Wars and X-Men, but it's not hard to have deeper analysis of those things, what with them featuring plot points and characters centered around legislation and systemic oppression and parallels to contemporary real-world events like the Civil Rights Movement or Vietnam, or manufactured consent for the war in the Middle East. But there's a lot of media that comes and goes that just gets taken for granted that it's apolitical in themes or messaging, and it's often because that media is aimed at younger audiences. The reaction to the Mario movie from so many regressive dipshits who only ever have commentary in regards to how woke or anti-woke any given piece supposedly is kind of illustrates a major problem. Somehow these idiots continue to have large audiences for their commentary despite being, idiots. But that's another talk. No, the major problem I actually want to address is that despite everyone consuming artistic content in far greater volumes and frequency than ever before in all of human history, everyone kind of just presumes to have a level of media literacy and ability to intellectually engage with that material that I feel isn't always honestly representative of those beliefs, as evidenced by the kinds of takes they espouse. A lot of people struggle to get past the surface level of a lot of their favorite media, and if the subtext of a work isn't made actual text by a character speaking to the audience, it seems like a lot of stuff slips by people, sometimes even when it's expressly stated. And often it's the most prescient and challenging messages to our status quo that are featured in our art that go unexamined. So much of nerd culture involves lots of adults still stuck on defending the legitimacy of their interest in their favorite things from childhood. But when you try to engage in some more in-depth analysis of the material, or sometimes even some fair criticism of archaic tropes and ideas, you get met with hostility.
Why are you politicizing this? It's just supposed to be fun. Keep your politics and your agenda out of it.
Which is weird, right? We're supposed to be asserting that our favorite stuff actually is more intellectually engaging than just the kind of stuff that only a child can appreciate. Our stuff isn't deceptively mature because it sometimes features violence or sex or language typically deemed unacceptable for children, but because the ideas presented are something worth understanding regardless of age, and sometimes can only be appreciated with a certain level of maturity. A lot of times, the politics were actually pretty clear from the start, and you didn't realize either because you were too young, or you aren't aware of the then contemporary issues that the work is commenting on. And if that material persists into the present, if those stories get told and retold and continued, it should also feature developing levels of maturity in how it handles its own subject matter. So how about a couple examples? Are any of you guys familiar with Astro Boy? I'm sure you know of him. He's the Mickey Mouse of the anime world. He's possibly the most famous creation of the god of manga, Osamu Tezuka, who penned over 150,000 pages of manga in his 60 years of life. Tetsuwan Atamu, or Astro Boy, is a 1952 manga series, and the 1963 anime adaptation of that manga was the first major television anime hit of all time. There's a lot of cool stuff that could be said about Tezuka and Astro Boy, from how Tezuka was not only a prolific mangaka and animator who founded his own studio which produced the original anime, but also how he had a medical degree from Osaka University. Or how about the fact that his story, The Greatest Robot on Earth, is undeniably the inspiration for most escalating shonen battle stories, particularly that of Dragon Ball. But I spent too much time blithering about Super Mario, so let's skip to the important stuff. Astro Boy is a staple of the anime and manga world, and as such, his stories have been subject to numerous readaptations over the decades. In early 2020, I had the pleasure of watching through the 2003 anime adaptation, and it's that version I kind of want to focus on. Alright, so dig this. It's the future, and advancements in robotics have brought about a new age of technology and industry, where robots are commonplace and they do all kinds of work for humans, allowing for widespread prosperity and luxury. And all of robot kind is subject to a number of standard protocols which dictate how they interact with humans. Basically, robots exist to make people happy, and robots are not allowed to bring harm to humans. You'll do what you're told, and you'll jolly well like it, thank you. Enter Astro, the creation of the brilliant though somewhat unstable Dr. Tenma. Tenma's son, Tobio, was the victim of a tragic car accident, and in his grief, Tenma crafted a robot duplicate of Tobio to be the strongest and most advanced robot known to mankind, and to be his surrogate son. Where the manga has Tenma's fevered mind forgetting that robots don't grow and age like humans, leading to an enraged doctor selling this doll that is not his real son to the circus, this version updates the story a bit. With Astro growing distraught over how casually his father discards robots when they've served their purpose, Tenma decommissions Astro, putting him into storage before disappearing himself. Whereupon, Astro is later reactivated by the new chairman of the Ministry of Science, Dr. Ochanamizu, in the series' first episode. The series explains that what makes Astro special, beyond having powers and capabilities far beyond his robot brethren, is a quality referred to as kokoro, or heart, and it's this quality that seems to make Astro better capable of empathizing with others. It's not totally clear how that differs from the other robots in this series, all of whom show a capacity for, or at least a strong ability to mimic, independent thoughts, ideas, and emotions. The robots in this world are capable of loving, laughing, and feeling sorrow just the same as you or I, and Astro bears witness to a lot of the conflicting emotions of his fellow robots throughout the series, as it's pretty quickly apparent that robots are not always treated with the dignity and care that their seeming sapience would entitle them to. While it's generally considered uncouth or undesirable to abuse, disrespect, belittle, or casually discard robots, this unpaid working class, who exists to the benefit of humans, there's not really incentive against or punishment for doing just that. If you buy a toaster, you don't want to hear about its problems or indulge its preferences in kitchen radio stations. You want it to shut up, sit on the counter, and make toast when and how you like it. Kinda seems odd that humans would put these personalities into their consumer electronics that they buy and sell if they didn't want to respect them. Now it's possible the level of complexity that humans expect out of the robots, despite their specialized functions, necessitates a level of complex artificial intelligence by which consciousness and emotion become an emergent property. After all, you could just buy a fancy toaster if you didn't want to have to engage in civility with your home appliances. Or maybe they just kinda like the idea of servants that have forced friendly smiles and polite small talk despite not considering them real individuals. It is at this point I think it's important to inform you, my beloved viewership, that the term robot is a Slavic term coined by Karel and Josef Čapek that means serf labor.
Or slave!
Robots, after all, exist to work for the benefit of humans, whether that benefit be in the form of leisure time or profit, neither of which the robots are entitled to despite being the ones who make it possible. As the misquoted meme about classism goes, "It's society! They work for each other, Morty! They pay each other! They make robots who work for them!" That's just slavery with extra steps! You might almost think of Astro as his story's Martin Luther King Jr. Despite having cannons built into his arms and strength measured at 1 million horsepower, he tends to favor defensive, non-violent action in response to aggression. And that turns out to be an even more apropos analogy in the latter half of the 2003 series, when we're introduced to another robot character, the Blue Knight, a robot revolutionary who has had enough of enduring humanity's abuse and has started a campaign of liberating robots around the world from human oppression. And remember how I said there were laws against robots acting against humans? Yeah, well, if Astro is MLK, then the Blue Knight is Malcolm X because he recognizes that oppressive classes will never willingly relinquish control of the systems of oppression with appeals to morality. They must be forced into doing so. They must be forced to do so even though it might be illegal or go against the standards of civility politics. Mayhaps those laws and moral obligations exist to perpetuate the oppression. As tensions between humans and robots rise, a billionaire industrialist by the name of Acetylene Lamp gets involved and sparks a huge anti-robot reactionary movement with lies about robot violence turning the public against them. The police robots must come to terms with their role as class traitors as they wrongfully incarcerate their robot peers despite their misgivings. And ultimately, fighting back in direct force are an inescapable necessity in the war for robot liberation. Astro's appeals to polite decorum are insufficient in bringing about change, and the Blue Knight's ideology is vindicated. Hey, did I happen to mention I watched this series in the spring of 2020? It wouldn't be until the summer of that year with the surge of Black Lives Matter activism in the wake of the grisly police murder of George Floyd when I would come to better appreciate the validity of the Blue Knight's seemingly extreme stance. Like a lot of white former liberals, I tended to side with Dr. King's civility politics over Malcolm X's more radical beliefs and the necessity for more deliberate and forceful resistance. And as such, I viewed this series at the time as just a quaint morality play on the evils of prejudice, all the while ignorant to what the series was attempting to convey. There's a lot more to Astro Boy and the various robot stories that have come out since then, such as Blade Runner and Westworld and Gundam and Mega Man, than just a pithy, "people should play nice with others." But while race and class can have a lot of overlap, this is not exclusively so. While you can read a lot of racial coding into the world of Astro Boy, as I have here, I think it's also worth noting that the series' country of origin, Japan, is an island nation with very strict immigration policy. It's not the melting pot that I, with my American perspective, have viewed it with. And while I don't wish to diminish everything I've said about this series and racial issues thus far, it seems worth pointing out that Tezuka was most likely constructing his narratives and their themes with the intent that they be understood primarily through the lens of class. These themes of class discrimination are no accident, nor are they unique to the 2003 series, as the original manga and previous anime adaptations feature them as well. If you recall the name Karel Čapek, whom I mentioned just a minute ago, he was a Czech sci-fi writer whose play, Rossum's Universal Robots, dealt with the ethics of exploiting these non-humans for profit. Robots as allegory for class discrimination seems to be a recurring motif for Tezuka works. In 1949, he would pen the manga Metropolis, a very loose adaptation of the 1927 film of the same name, written and directed by Fritz Lang and Thea von Harbou, often considered the world's first science fiction film. Tezuka's manga would also inspire a 2001 anime film adaptation. The 1927 film features very strong socialist messaging and also humanoid robots, though unlike Chapek and Tezuka, it was very much the humans who are being most harmed and exploited in that work. But in any case, you have a class of individuals who are abused, exploited, and thoughtlessly discarded by a wealthy owning class who pays little mind to the struggles and pain of that working class, and who only pays attention when those struggles turn to grievance and start to inconvenience them and their continued profit. And when that grievance manifests, the owning class finds ways to turn the lower classes against each other, demonizing or dehumanizing particular groups so that they remain fractured and unable to form the solidarity necessary to overpower the owning class. MLK would speak on this too, pointing to socialism as the only means by which true equality and broader racial and social justice could be achieved. So long as someone stands to profit from exploitation, they will seek to ensure that the exploitation is legitimized socially. Let's get another example of overlooked political theming in seemingly simple fiction. 1897's War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells is often considered to be the first example of the alien invader trope, though it was predated 5 years by another lesser-known work, The Germ Growers, but anyways. And it features Earth, specifically England, beset by an army of technologically superior Martians who have come to Earth to plunder us for resources. Earth frankly doesn't stand a chance against the Martians, whose ray guns can effortlessly disintegrate any opposition, until suddenly all of the Martians keel over stone dead from bacteria in our water. Well, that's anticlimactic. If you've seen either of the film adaptations or are familiar with the Orson Welles radio broadcast, this central premise is unaltered in all of them. In the time of its original publication, it was a reflection of England's own attempt to conquer parts of Africa, where the colonizing might of Britain and their gunpowder, which absolutely decimated the native peoples, was only routed, their attempts at genocide, rape, and pillage only hindered, by the diseases that the locals were mostly immune to, but that the English were absolutely helpless before. England, in case you didn't know, is possibly the world champion of imperialism and colonization, though plenty of other countries are no slouches in that department themselves. Russia, China, Japan, France, Rome, the US. But it's not a coincidence that countries all around the world still have national holidays celebrating their independence from British rule. Nor is it a coincidence that England started the traditions of museums being filled with artifacts and treasures stolen from other lands. Cue Killmonger monologue here. War of the Worlds is a critique of imperialism by way of making the reader sympathetic with the plight of the colonized. Said Wells of his own work, "And before we judge the Martians too harshly, we must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not only upon animals such as the vanished bison and the dodo, but upon its own inferior races. The Tasmanians, in spite of their human likeness, were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain if the Martians warred in the same spirit? In short, be nice to foreigners, you wouldn't like it if they were mean to you." In fact, almost all alien races in fiction since then, particularly the invading ones, can be analogous to the other, the archetypical foreigner, some entity that can be considered inhuman, amorphous, indistinguishable from their whole peoples. Not individuals which can be spoken to or reasoned with different equally valid cultures and histories, but a unified, hostile, existential threat that seeks to annihilate and supplant us. I mean, the word alien is still used when talking about foreigners, though obviously people tend to mostly think of little green men or xenomorphs nowadays. And understanding the code of extraterrestrials equals foreigners can paint a lot of works in a new light. Superman, Alf, Chewbacca, E.T., Klingons, Skrulls, etc. A lot of works deliberately lean into that, such as District 9 or James Cameron's Avatar. Though anymore, it sure seems like humans end up being the ones who defeat the aliens through their own means and not through fluke of pestilence. Which kinda leads you to wonder, how about all those times when the aliens in a work of fiction are just a horde of indistinguishable bad guys who are all biologically and ideologically predisposed to infiltration, probing experiments, and hostility? The Chitauri from the Avengers, the Xenomorphs, Space Invaders, Independence Day, Mars Attacks, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Ender's Game, Starship Troopers, etc. Replace the aliens in those stories with brown people, or Asian people, or Jewish people, or even LGBT people, and it kind of takes on a new light. It kind of fits right in with ugly perspectives like alt-right replacement theory or cultural Bolshevism, or ideas of sexually aggressive minorities who just want to rape our women and propagate their own race. Hell, H.P. Lovecraft made his entire career doing just that, writing stories about aliens who want to drive us mad, conquer our world, interbreed with us, and eventually eliminate us. And notice how often the heroes in those stories, often peace-loving and reluctant to adopt violence, show no compunction in thoughtlessly eliminating any and every alien who might cross their path, taking it as read that they're just hostile forces and not, say, civilian refugees who have human sympathies, or doctors, or diplomats, or scientists. Surely some of the aliens are just citizens whose job it is to cook food or tend to the young and maybe have no interest in planet conquering. Maybe they're just holding guns because they're on foreign land and they're afraid for their lives, conscripted into a war against their will by their superiors. And they don't know enough of our language or customs to explain themselves or surrender. And we're not interested in giving them a chance. Otherizing is a pretty common trope in a lot of fiction. You ever notice how the bad guy armies are made up of hordes of indistinguishable, unrelatable forces even when they are human? How they might all wear uniforms that include masks or helmets that cover up any identifying facial features or emotive expressions, or how they might just be a bunch of indistinguishable, non-human, non-conventionally attractive faces that we can just instantly write off as obstacles and cannon fodder, unworthy of individual consideration. Imperial stormtroopers, ninjas, Daleks, the Covenant, Goombas and Koopa Troopies, anyone? You never feel bad about stomping enemy grunts in video games, not just because they're digital. You can feel bad about accidentally killing horses in Breath of the Wild, even though those aren't real, but you never spare a thought for casually obliterating things that might just be minding their own business, unaware you're even around. And it's not unique to science fiction, it happens in fantasy too. Let's look at the fictional history of the Lord of the Rings. The bad guys there are Sauron and the Orcs, a race of elves and humans who were twisted by dark magic from some dark god of chaos or whatever, several millennia ago. They all live in Mordor, a barren wasteland with a big fucking volcano in the middle where little is able to grow or survive. The elves of Middle-earth are shown to be immortal and the most conventionally attractive people of all the races, and they live in beautiful forest kingdoms with some of the oldest and most powerful magic readily available to them, and they're the chosen people of their universe's god. The elves are also huge, racist assholes who have very patronizing views on humans and hobbits, both of whom have much shorter lifespan than the elves, and they have nothing but contempt for dwarves. Apparently Tolkien was trying to rework a lot of his mythos when he died, leaving the Silmarillion unfinished, but it does kind of leave the impression that elves might have had selfish reasons to unfairly demonize the orcs and shunt them off to some unfavorable location, claiming all the good land and resources for themselves. And then they could just make up a bunch of justifying folklore about it that all the other nations made up of short-lived mortals who are slightly better looking than the orcs might believe. Who's gonna dispute them? You weren't there, but the elves were, or so they claim. And then, when the orcs decide to try and invade the greener pastures of the various other folk of Middle-earth, try to find some more hospitable land to live on, everyone can just believe what the elves had to say about those ugly, smelly orcs, never once considering how their elvish benefactors keep all the best stuff for themselves. Tolkien was very outspoken against Nazis and eugenics in his time, but that doesn't mean he wouldn't also have had some deep-seated prejudices like many other people of that era would have, and still do today, about swarthy, dark-skinned, seemingly brutish folk who don't wear shirts and trousers like us civilized folks, who paint themselves and dance around fires, singing and beating drums as part of ceremonies and cultures we aren't privy to. Or hey, how about goblins? Scampering, greedy, thieving, cave-dwelling little imps with hooked noses and pointy ears and sickly complexions. You know where else you might find such a creature? In the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a 1903 fictional anti-Semitic propaganda piece written to unfairly characterize and demonize Jewish people as fiendish, scheming, money-hungry subhumans who constantly plot to manipulate and influence good Christian folk. With renewed interest in the works of J.K. Rowling due to her ongoing villain arc, a lot of hash has been made about her characterization of the goblins in her wizarding world. Not to mention how she treats a lot of her characters, from wizards who don't come from English backgrounds to the race of house elves. Kind of explains all of the turfy friends J.K. has been making on Twitter, who turn out to be all kinds of awful people and not simply run-of-the-mill transphobes. Psst. They're neo-Nazis. She's making friends with neo-Nazis on the grounds that they all hate trans people. When you start to really think about stuff like this, you start to see it in a lot of different works. World of Warcraft, Dungeons & Dragons, Legend of Zelda, Warhammer, Attack on Titan, The Witcher, Goblin Slayer. It kinda makes something like interspecies reviewers look comparatively wholesome, and that's no small feat. Huh. It kinda seems like there's politics in a lot of things. Our media isn't just fun little games, my young Alfreds. I could go on, talking about all kinds of stuff from vampires to zombies to ancient civilizations, or superheroes. You all know I've got lots to say on superheroes, and if you watched the Gundam Ariel video, I was just getting started on all the ways you can interpret superheroes. If we want to grow up with our media, if we want to mature in our understanding of it, we have to be willing to grapple with grander themes and ideas and the challenging, often uncomfortable implications that they might present. And to be clear, I don't think certain tropes are always indicative of conscious malice on the part of the creators. Quite possibly, a lot of things become so ingrained in our psyches that we just use them without thinking, not unlike Tolkien, not unlike damsels in distress. A lot of fiction writers are coming to be more cognizant of the tropes within their influences and are trying to address or subvert these tropes in ways that make them better suited to our more contemporary, more diverse, more progressive, more enlightened world. So what I'm saying, dear viewers, is if you want to intellectualize and mature your appreciation of your favorite things, you have to grant them the respect they deserve instead of treating them like intellectual baby food. You have to recognize that it's not all perfect and that a lot of the stuff you take for granted has bigger impact than you give it credit for. Even seemingly childish things like the Super Mario Bros. Movie might have things that they can teach us or ideas that they can reinforce or deconstruct. And if there's someone trivializing these things, calling them woke propaganda, you have to ask yourself, are they just stupid and don't understand what they're criticizing? Or do they understand perfectly, and are they being deliberately dishonest about the messaging to you, the people they seek to influence? And what other ways could the themes and ideas present in all your favorite stuff be influencing you as an audience? And if trained to ignore them by pundits, commentators, critics, and influencers, what kind of messaging are you missing out on? Whew! Heavy one this time, huh? Bet you didn't expect all that after all that time spent talking about Super Mario. And boy, did this one run real long. Kind of unfortunate that it was such a short build. Well, we haven't seen the last of this sort of topic either. Thanks so much for spending your time listening to me. I really appreciate knowing that there are people out there, even just a few, who will indulge me talking way too long about way too many things. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Mario movie or about the stuff I talked about here. I don't know if the notifications bell is still a thing, but if it is, you should ring it. And be here next time because we've got the VF1 Valkyrie. This is DBiddles asking you to subscribe to ChatBots. Okay, bye-bye.